abandonment and injustice. He names real truth about broken systems, even as his response ultimately mirrors the violence he's been fighting. Cruella de Vil, she had a little comeback recently. Did anyone see that film? Was that last year? Cruella came out. She started as a creative, uncompromising outsider, labeled as too much for too long, mixed with grief and betrayal. She eventually inhabits the identity that the world assigns her. And Darth Vader, maybe that's where I'll get some folks. You all have your own villains. I want to know what villains you're loving these days. I'm still hoping for an Ursula backstory. That's the one that I'm really here for. But Anakin Skywalker, once hopeful and gifted and deeply loving, he's slowly formed by fear and disillusionment and manipulation. It's not one bad choice, but a series of compromises that, encouraged by a powerful system, promise safety in exchange for obedience. Villains are rarely born. They're formed by loss, by fear, by the stories that power tells them of who they are allowed to be. Origin stories don't excuse what a villain does, but they do complicate it. They complicate a good-bad binary. The Wicked Witch of the West. The villain in the land of Oz, the greatest fear of Munchkin and Emerald City resident and Dorothy alike, has an origin story too. I want to thank Gloria for our third Stump the Pastor sermon series, asking about the theology of wicked. I gave you all a warning last week that this is just spoiler after spoiler. So if you haven't watched it yet, I'm sorry. You can close your ears and hum. In Wicked, the story begins with Elphaba's birth. She's born with green skin, and from the very beginning, that difference marks her as a problem. Her father is ashamed of her. Her sister, Nessa Rose, born with a disability, and so Elphaba grows up both responsible for her and invisible beside her. As a young woman, Elphaba ends up accompanying her sister as she attends Shiz University, the school where future leaders of Oz are trained. And there she meets Glinda. We will later know her as the Good Witch, but in school she stands out for being popular, a song that will never, ever get out of my head as soon as I hear that word. She is charming and very good at playing by the rules. The two start out as reluctant roommates and rivals, but slowly, unexpectedly, they become friends. At school, Elphaba discovers that she has real power, actual magical ability. But she also becomes increasingly aware that something is not right in Oz. Animals who once spoke and taught, they were university professors, are being silenced. They're being imprisoned, removed from public life, put in cages, which is for them unimaginable. Most people notice but don't ask questions. Elphaba can't stop asking questions. When Elphaba and Glinda are invited to meet the wizard, Elphaba believes briefly that the system can be fixed from the inside, that the wizard can fix what's happening. But she learns, spoiler, that the wizard himself is behind the persecution of animals, using fear and cheap tricks to maintain control, pretending he is the one that Oz has been waiting for when really true power and prophecy has not yet arrived. He offers Elphaba power and protection if she will help him. She refuses, and that refusal changes everything. So there's the summary if you haven't watched it. 2.5, almost 3 hours and 2 minutes. Elphaba becomes the one blamed for unrest in Oz. The wizard and Madame Morrible rewrite the story, casting her as dangerous, ungrateful, and wicked. Glinda says, Elphaba leaves, and in that moment, singing Defining Gravity, Elphaba chooses truth over belonging, integrity over safety. By the time we meet the Wicked Witch in The Wizard of Oz, we're seeing the end of the story, the very end of the story, and a story that began with courage and integrity, one who would not cooperate with injustice. In whose eyes is Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, really a villain? In whose eyes is she the villain, and in whose eyes is she the hero? Jesus might have been considered a villain to some. And by that I mean he was absolutely considered a villain in the story of the Roman Empire. He was a villain to the person selling doves in the temple courtyard that day. He was a villain to the money changers whose job it was to exchange Roman coins for temple currency so pilgrims could buy sacrifices. And he was absolutely a villain for the person who was chased around by him as he brandished a whip, something that only Mark gives us, but is a little detail that I think it's just, can't pass that one by. He was also a villain to the chief priests and the scribes when he healed the blind and the lame. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. He was a villain to them when he healed. Jesus showed up and he's angry and he shouts and he destroys property. And then in the space that follows that disruption, once business as usual has stopped, he brings the people who had been pushed out, the blind and the lame, the ones who couldn't fully participate in the system, even when they followed all the rules, and he heals them. And when they shout with joy, when they cry out with hope, with relief, with sheer unimagined possibility suddenly made real, they sing, Hosanna! Hosanna, a cry for both help and a shout of praise. They call him the Son of David. They make a theological claim that this is the one we have been waiting for, the Messiah, the promised one. The marginalized people recognize Jesus for who he is. Those in power begin to see him as the one they must vilify, the one they must turn into a villain in order to keep empire intact. Sound familiar? They ask Jesus, do you hear what they are saying? They try and give him an out, a chance to get back in line. They ask Jesus, do you hear what they're saying? They try and let him say, okay, I can compromise this. I can get on board with you. And Jesus responds, yes, I do hear them. Have you ever heard out of the mouths of infants and nursing babes, you have prepared praise for yourself? And of course they've read it. He's quoting Psalm 8 to them. They are religious leaders, a psalm about God's uncontested power and glory. He's got some snark. He's got some attitude here. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I do not know how we turned Jesus into someone so meek and mild. I don't know how we made him apolitical, not partisan. He's not playing those games, but apolitical, as if he has nothing to say about how power is organized and shared in society. We come to this text believing in Jesus' goodness. We are primed to see how his actions are righteous. I hope not too primed that we miss some of the chaos and energy and anger that is present here. But if we didn't know who he was, if we just walked onto the scene, how would we know whether he was the hero or whether he was the villain? It'd be pretty hard to tell. We'd need context. We'd need to know that the temple system, while religiously sanctioned, disproportionately harmed poor people. Pilgrims were required to buy approved sacrifices and exchange currency, often at exploitative rates. It was a system so normalized, so embedded, that questioning it would have sounded irresponsible, dangerous. But Jesus had a vision of what God's house was meant to be, because he had a vision of what God's kingdom would be like. And no matter what compromises the powers that be had decided were necessary for survival, no matter how that's just how things work, that's just how things are, Jesus refused to confuse convenience with faithfulness. He had a clear vision of what just worship looked like, what a just economic system looked like, what a community ordered around mercy rather than extraction looked like. We might hear this and hear something bad is happening in Oz. In Wicked, something bad is happening, but slowly. so slowly that many people don't notice it at first. But the ones who are hurt first do notice, the animals. And the ones in real relationship with them notice too, Elphaba. Again, socialization soaks into the cracks, slowly warping what were once strong, sturdy boards of an ethical framework. Or maybe not so strong, because when people are willing to give up truth for the illusion of peace, morals don't stand a chance. The house will crumble and fall. There was a thing going around social media a few years ago. People were talking about entering their villain era. One laugh, thank you. We're on the same TikTok. Good looking out. I don't know that people are saying it anymore. This is probably a little dated. No, we're confirming people are not saying this anymore. But the alignment here is too good to pass up. No, some people were really talking about entering their villain era as being unkind to others. That is not what I'm promoting here. I just really want everyone to hear that. But a lot of people meant it for the super wild things like saying no to things you really didn't want to do, or no longer apologizing for taking up space. That was entering your villain era. Or naming harm instead of just smoothing it over and laughing it off. That was entering your villain era. Choosing honesty over being liked. That was entering your villain era. But by saying I'm entering my villain era, it gave people permission to do the things that are actually really good and healthy and needed, not just being nice all the time. And I'll say it again, as much for me as for you, that nice and good are not the same thing. Nice and good are not the same thing. Nice keeps the peace. Nice avoids discomfort. Nice protects the status quo. But goodness can flip some tables. Goodness can make others feel uncomfortable for the right reasons. Goodness can look like defiance when defiance is the only faithful option left. There are so many layers in Wicked, especially as explored through the film, and some of them cannot be ignored. It can't be ignored that Elphaba, born green, experiences not just awkwardness or exclusion, but the kind of hostility and suspicion that echoes the everyday realities faced by many BIPOC folks. What are sometimes called microaggressions that are really not micro at all. It can also not be ignored that white supremacy operates with that same mix of paternalism and control, with that performative niceness that we see in Oz, a system that claims to be orderly and benevolent while doing deep harm to people of color and quietly compromising the spirits of white folks as well. Elphaba is blamed for chaos again and again. At one point she says, "I don't cause commotions, I am one." And that line resonates beyond the screen because it names a familiar reality. There are people who are treated as a threat simply for existing outside what the system can manage, for speaking up, for refusing to shrink, for a small act of defiance, no matter how good or how nice they are trying to be. Simply their existence is a challenge to the system. As soon as it becomes clear that Elphaba cannot be controlled, cannot or will not lend her powers to the power that be, she is labeled a wicked witch. And rather than compromise her values to earn her way back into acceptance, she makes a different choice. She takes on the identity that has been forced upon her, not because it's completely true, but because she will no longer let the system define her. Her goodbye with her friend Glinda at the end of part 1 comes in the song Defying Gravity, and I'm so glad y'all will get to hear that. As we listen, may we all consider how we are called to break with the world in order to break out of the imaginations of empire. May we consider the unlimited, liberating imagination of God. And may we, in at least a few small ways, consider how we're being called into our very own villain era today and tomorrow. May it be so. May it be here. Amen.